Most disappearances happen in the dark, in remote places, where nobody is watching. That's what makes those cases terrifying, but explainable. But what about the cases where the darkness had nothing to do with it? Where the disappearance happened in full sunlight, on a street full of people, in the middle of the day? These are the cases that make no sense, because the darkness can't be blamed. The isolation can't be blamed. The witnesses were there. The sun was shining. And these people still vanished. Tonight I am going to tell you about 3 of them. 3 people who stepped into broad daylight and were never seen again. The first case takes us to New York City. December 12, 1910. Dorothy Arnold was 25 years old, the daughter of Francis Arnold, a wealthy importer whose family moved in the highest circles of New York society. Dorothy had attended the best schools. She had traveled to Europe. She had every advantage that money and position could provide. But Dorothy wanted something her family couldn't give her. She wanted to be a writer. She had been quietly submitting short stories to magazines under a pseudonym, afraid her family would disapprove. She had recently submitted a story to McClure's magazine and was waiting anxiously to hear back. On the morning of December 12th, she told her mother she was going shopping on Fifth Avenue. She seemed perfectly normal. She left the house at 11 a.m. She was never seen again. Dorothy's movements that morning were later reconstructed through witness accounts. At approximately 11:30 a.m., she stopped at a chemist on Fifth Avenue and purchased a quarter pound of chocolates. The chemist who served her remembered her. She seemed perfectly fine. Nothing unusual about her behavior. She then stopped at Brentano's bookstore and purchased a book. Again, nothing unusual. Nothing to suggest what was about to happen. At approximately 1 p.m., she ran into a friend named Gladys King at the corner of 59th Street and Fifth Avenue. They stopped and chatted for several minutes. Gladys King later told investigators that Dorothy seemed completely normal. Happy even. They said goodbye. Dorothy continued south down Fifth Avenue. Gladys King watched her walk away. That was the last time anyone ever saw Dorothy Arnold. Dorothy's home was less than 10 blocks away, a 30-minute walk at most, on one of the busiest streets in the world, in the middle of the afternoon. By evening her family was concerned. By nightfall they were frightened. But they did not call the police. The Arnold family were wealthy and intensely private. A public police search meant newspaper coverage. Newspaper coverage meant scandal. Scandal was unacceptable. So they waited. And they hired private investigators quietly. For 6 weeks, the Arnold family conducted a private investigation through the Pinkerton Agency. 6 weeks of searching. 6 weeks of questioning. 6 weeks of following leads that went nowhere. They found nothing. In January 1911, 6 weeks after Dorothy disappeared, the family finally went to the police. The story broke publicly. New York was stunned. And the trail was already ice cold. Police immediately recognized the damage the 6-week delay had caused. Witnesses' memories had faded. Physical evidence was gone. Any trail that might have existed had gone completely cold. The investigation focused on the 10-block stretch between 59th Street and the Arnold home. Somewhere in those 10 blocks Dorothy Arnold had ceased to exist. How was impossible to determine. Every shop and residence along the route was canvassed. Nobody had seen anything unusual. Nobody had seen a young woman in distress. Nobody had seen anything at all. Central Park was searched. The Hudson River was examined. Buildings along the route were checked. Nothing was found. Dorothy Arnold had walked down the most famous street in America in the middle of the afternoon and simply ceased to exist. Several theories emerged over the years. The most discussed: Dorothy had been secretly involved with a man named George Griscom Jr., a 42-year-old family friend her parents strongly disapproved of. The theory suggested she had become pregnant, sought an illegal procedure, and died as a result, with the body disposed of to avoid scandal. George Griscom was investigated extensively. He was in Europe when Dorothy vanished, which he used as an alibi. He denied any involvement. No evidence was ever found to connect him to her disappearance. Another theory: she had run away. Her father refused to believe she was dead for years after her disappearance. He was convinced she was alive somewhere and would eventually come home. She never did. Dorothy Arnold was declared legally dead in 1921, 11 years after she vanished. No body was ever found. No credible witness ever came forward. No explanation was ever established. Dorothy Arnold walked down Fifth Avenue on a December morning in 1910. She was 25 years old. She was never seen again. The second case takes us forward 3 years. Ambrose Bierce was 71 years old and one of the most celebrated writers in American history. He had fought in the Civil War as a soldier, seeing some of the bloodiest battles of the conflict. He had spent decades afterward as a journalist and satirist, writing dark, cynical, brilliant work that made him famous across America. His most famous works, The Devil's Dictionary and An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, are still read and studied today. He was a man who had spent his entire life staring into darkness and writing about what he saw there. October 1913, Bierce embarked on what he called a farewell tour. He visited Civil War battlefields across the South. Then he crossed into Mexico, alone, during a revolution. The Mexican Revolution had been tearing the country apart since 1910. Armed factions fought across the desert. Villages were caught in the crossfire. People disappeared every day. Into this, Ambrose Bierce walked alone. His last confirmed location was Chihuahua, Mexico in late December 1913. He wrote a letter from there to his friend Blanche Partington. In the letter, he described traveling with Pancho Villa's forces. He wrote about the revolution with the detached curiosity of a journalist who had seen war before and was not afraid of it. And then he wrote these words: "As for what will happen to me, I have no idea." After that letter, silence. No more correspondence. No more sightings. No trace. Ambrose Bierce walked into the Mexican desert in December 1913. He was never seen or heard from again. 3 theories have dominated the Bierce case for over a century. The first, execution. Bierce had been traveling with Pancho Villa's forces. It is possible that Villa or another faction leader became suspicious of him. An American journalist asking questions in the middle of a revolution and had him shot. Executions during the revolution were common and rarely documented. The second theory, natural causes. Bierce was 71 years old. He suffered from severe asthma. The desert climate, the physical demands of traveling through a war zone, and his age combined could simply have killed him. If he died alone in the desert, his body would have been impossible to find. The third theory is the most unusual. That Bierce planned his disappearance deliberately. He had always had a dark sense of humor. He had written farewell letters. He had called the trip a farewell tour. Some who knew him believed he had simply decided to vanish, as his final act of defiance against a world he had grown tired of. None of these theories were ever confirmed. No body was ever found. No witness ever came forward. Ambrose Bierce walked into Mexico in 1913. He was never seen again. The third case takes us to Michigan. July 30th, 1975. Jimmy Hoffa was the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. With over 2 million members, the Teamsters was one of the largest and most powerful trade unions in America. Hoffa had built it into that power through a combination of genuine advocacy for workers and connections to organized crime that were an open secret in Washington. Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General, had made pursuing Hoffa a personal mission. In 1964, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering and fraud. He served prison time. In 1971, President Nixon granted him clemency, on the condition that he stay out of union leadership until 1980. By 1975, Hoffa was trying to overturn the condition barring him from union leadership. He wanted his power back. Powerful people, in organized crime and in the union itself, did not want that to happen. On July 30th, 1975, Hoffa drove to a meeting at the Marchus Red Fox restaurant in suburban Michigan. He was never seen again. Hoffa arrived at the restaurant at approximately 2:30 p.m. He was there to meet two men, Anthony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official with mob connections, and Anthony Giacolone, a Detroit organized crime figure. He waited in the parking lot. The men he was meeting did not arrive. At approximately 2:45 p.m., Hoffa made two calls from a payphone outside the restaurant. One to his wife Josephine, one to a friend named Lualinto. In both calls, he complained that the men he was supposed to meet were late. After those calls, nothing. A witness reported seeing Hoffa get into a car in the parking lot with several men. His own car was found in the parking lot the following day. Jimmy Hoffa was gone. His wife reported him missing that evening. The FBI was notified immediately. One of the largest missing persons investigations in American history began the next morning. The FBI had suspects from day one. Anthony Provenzano, who had a violent history with Hoffa and had allegedly threatened his life years earlier. Anthony Giacolone, who had set up the meeting but denied being there. Both men denied involvement. Neither could be charged. The FBI believed Hoffa had been lured to the meeting under false pretenses, killed, and his body disposed of by organized crime figures who feared his return to power. The Teamsters pension fund, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was controlled by mob-connected figures. Hoffa's return threatened that control. The motive was clear. The evidence was not. The search for Hoffa's body became one of the longest-running investigations in FBI history. A New Jersey landfill was excavated in 1989. A Michigan horse farm was searched in 2004 after an informant provided a tip. A suburban Detroit house was torn apart in 2012. None of these searches found anything. The FBI has received hundreds of tips over the decades. Every single one has led nowhere. The most widely accepted theory, that Hoffa was killed by organized crime and his body cremated or buried in a location that has never been found, has never been proven in court. Several people believed to have direct knowledge of what happened have died without talking. Jimmy Hoffa was declared legally dead in 1982. The FBI officially considers the case unsolved. No body has ever been found. No witness has ever provided evidence that stands up in court. Jimmy Hoffa walked into a parking lot in Michigan on a summer afternoon in 1975. He was never seen again. 3 cases. 3 different decades. Dorothy Arnold in 1910. Ambrose Bierce in 1913. Jimmy Hoffa in 1975. What connects them is not the darkness. There was no darkness. Dorothy Arnold vanished on the busiest street in America at midday. Ambrose Bierce walked into a sunlit desert and never came out. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared from a suburban parking lot on a summer afternoon. In each case, investigators had resources. In each case, there were witnesses and leads. In each case, the investigation hit a wall. In each case, the answer was never found. The darkness is not what you need to be afraid of. These 3 cases prove that. Because the sun was shining, the streets were full, and Dorothy Arnold, Ambrose Bierce, and Jimmy Hoffa vanished anyway. Every one of these cases started the same way. An ordinary day, an ordinary errand, a world full of people and light, and ended the same way. An empty space where a person used to be. No explanation. No body. No answer. Dorothy Arnold. Ambrose Bierce. Jimmy Hoffa. 3 people who stepped into the daylight and never came back. If this video stayed with you, subscribe to Night Trace. There are more cases like these, and some of them happened much closer to home than you think.